Hi, my name is Murali.
I'm going to show you how to use SAP WebIDE along with GitHub for source code version control. I'm going to start by first navigating to my GitHub profile, and I'm going to create a remote repository by using the new option, and let's give the name as approvals. And I'm going to select initialize this repository at the bottom and create it. Once this repository is created, I need to make a note of the URL so that I could then use it to clone in WebIDE. So I'm going to switch to WebIDE, and I'm going to start my development of my project by cloning the repository. So I'm going to go to the menu option, Git clone repository, provide the URL that I got earlier, and what this would do is is create a local repository where I as a developer would start building my development artifacts, and then synchronize this with the remote repository which is created in GitHub. So when I expand this, it by default gives me a readme file, and on the left hand side you have the Git pane, which gives you a list of all changes. By default it has marked the project.json file as being modified. I'm just going to open the readme file and change this one to say this is a readme file, and when I save it, this should also show up in the change list. I'm going to stage all these changes, and in the commit message I'm just going to say comments for a readme file, and then I'm going to click on commit. And what this would do is would mark an up arrow out here saying that there are things that have been committed but not yet pushed. So I'm going to use the push button here to push all these changes to the remote repository, and the master and the branch is the master branch. So I'm going to click on the master branch, and this would synchronize all these changes that I made in a local repository with the remote repository. Now I'm going to switch to the repository in GitHub, and you can see that the readme file has already been updated, and the comments against the changes are also showing up here. So for this demo, I'm assuming the role of two developers using this instance of WebIDE. So as a developer one, I've gone ahead and created this and modified the readme file. Now as a developer 2, I would also want to come in and start doing the same work on the same approvals project. So I would again go into Git clone repository and clone it. So what this would do is get in all the information from the remote repository and bring it out here. So if I open this file as a developer 2, I get to see all the changes. So let's assume the role of a developer 1 and create a new file. So I'm going to go to the approvals folder and create file 1. Just going to give some text to it. And I'm going to save it. And this should show up is in the change list. So I'm going to stage this one and put some comments here. And rather than just doing a commit and push, I could just use this button to straight away push the changes to the master. Now what this does is it synchronizes all the changes from the local repository to the remote repository. And now I'm going to assume the role of a developer 2. I'm going to go into this approvals 1 folder, and I'm going to create a new file called file 2 and put some text here and save the changes. So this should show up again as in the change list. I'm going to stage it, put some comments here for file 2. I'm going to hit the commit button, and this should show me an arrow mark facing upward saying there are changes that need to be pushed. I'm going to try and push this to the master. This should come with an error message saying it was unable to merge the changes because developer 1 has already been working on the same repository. So in order to get rid of this error message, what I would need to do is do a fetch. This will update all the references to the master repository, and you can see there was a change that is done by file 1, and then I'm going to click on rebase, which will actually update the files in this folder. So I will be able to see the file 1 created by developer 1 into this particular project. Now, once this is done, I should be able to push the changes because I still see there is an arrow mark saying that the changes need to be pushed to the master. So I'm just going to push all the changes to master, and this should synchronize all the changes. So I should be able to see file 1 and file 2 inside in the GitHub remote repository. So this scenario works well if multiple developers are working on different files. So let's take in a scenario where multiple developers are working on the same file, and how we're going to resolve the dependencies and conflicts. Now I'm going to go back to WebIDE. Before, as a developer, when I start to make any changes, I'm going to do a fetch and rebase just to make sure that the developer 1 also gets all the updated files with its file 1 and file 2. So I'm just selecting again master as the remote branch. So now both the folders are up to date. I'm going to now start with selecting file 1, and I'm just going to add one line here saying I'm just going to say this is a code introduced by developer 1, and I'm going to save the changes. I'm going to stage this one, and I'm just going to do a commit and push to the master repository. Now at the same time, developer 2 is also has a need to work on file 1. So as a developer 2, I'm going to go into the file 1 and say this code is introduced by developer 2, and I'm just going to click on the save button, and this should stage my changes. What I'm going to do next is mark it as staged and put in a comment saying comments by developer 2, and I'm going to do a commit and push to the master. So this should come back saying there is discrepancies and this needs to be resolved. So just like last time, I'm going to do a fetch to get all the updated references. So you can see there is the code by developer 1 that has been picked up, and I'm just going to do a rebase, and it's going to be on using the remote branch, which is master. So it gives a warning saying need to resolve the conflicts to continue. So I click on OK, and you would see that the file 1 has got both the code introduced by developer 1 and as well as the code introduced by developer 2. So as a developer, I would need to go in here. So if it is a class with some methods, then I would accordingly need to adjust it to make sure that it is it's up to date and it's got the data, the code from both the developers. So I'm just going to remove all these things and say code introduced by developer 1 and developer 2, and I'm going to save the changes. So I would need to also stage the changes here, but before that, yeah, if at all there is this conflict here, you would see there's a different icon that shows up next to the file one. So I'm going to stage it, and I'm going to click on the button here that says continue. I could either continue or abort it. So I'm going to say continue, which is actually continuing a rebase, and then I'm going to push the changes to master. So this should now synchronize this consolidated changes to the remote repository. Once this is done, I can again go in as developer 1 and then make sure that all the source code that I have also is up to date, and just do a fetch and a rebase. So this should ensure that again both the projects are are up to date and are synchronized. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is some of the additional features which you probably also need to be aware of. So let me close all these files and pick up file 1, and say if I happen to delete this particular line, and I click on save, this would then mark this as a changed file, and if for some reason I don't want to proceed with things, I can just click on the discard button, so that way I get my source code back. And another option is, say if you just say have some additional code, you can save the changes and stage them, and I'm going to say comments as additional code, and I can commit this one. So the moment you commit it, you should be able to see this in the Git history pane. So this actually gives you all the comments which have been done on this particular file. Now if for some reason you don't want things that you have so far committed, you could do a reset. Now when I click on reset, I'll get a pop-up saying whether you want it to be a mixed type or hard type. So when I say mixed type, it will merge the changes that you have in your local repository with the remote repository and give you an option. Or if you just want to just override everything with what's in the remote repository, you can just do a hard reset. So I'm just going to say okay and continue. So this would bring it back to the previous state. Another useful function is the amend comments out here. Say if you want to make some changes in your file, you would start by making changes, you would stage it, and then you would say you would commit all these things. And once you start committing things, you probably also want to ensure that you always frequently keep committing your changes, and then when you're done, you can then push the changes to your master master repository. So once you've committed it, you can also go ahead and say you can go ahead and keep adding further things into the same commit. So I'm just going to go and stage this next change and say amend, and this will automatically pick my commit message, and then I'm just going to commit from here. So those are some of the additional features which I thought I'd like to share, and they're pretty helpful when you're really working with complex programs and you want to sometimes revert back, or you want to keep adding additional comments onto existing ones. Okay, so the next important feature that I wanted to talk about is the feature branch. So usually in projects you would have your master branch, which would represent your production code, and any release that you are working on, you would have a feature branch, which is where all your developers would work on those changes specific to that release. And once it is tested and ready, it would be then merged to the master branch. So in this section, I'll probably try and show you how to work with feature branches and how you would end up merging these feature branches with your master branch. So before I start, let me first reset this to back where it was. And what I'm going to do is assume the role of a developer 1, and from the folder I'm just going to use the menu option to go to Git and select create a remote branch. Now I could do this also in straight away in GitHub, but there is option within WebIDE itself to do all these things. Now the source is obviously the master, and I'm going to give a name as feature 1. And when I click on OK, this would actually go and create a feature branch in the remote repository. The next thing I would need to do is click on the plus icon and select the source, the remote source, as the feature 1, and give a local branch name out here. So I'm just, for consistency, I'm just keeping it the same name as feature 1 and clicking on OK. So what this does is it creates a local repository for the feature 1, and this is again tied to the remote feature branch called feature 1. Now from here I could go in and create my files, and if you also notice that next to the approvals folder you can see the name of the branch. So it's feature 1 that's here, and it's also feature 1 that's selected out here. So I'm going to go in and create a new file called feature 1 file. I'm just going to put some text in there and save the changes. So once I save it, it's the same as before. So you stage all the changes, give in some comments, and commit the changes. And now you push it to the feature 1 branch. It's not the main master. So you push it to the feature 1 branch, and the code gets synchronized with the remote repository. Now if you want to confirm this, you can go back to GitHub, and you will be able to see that under the master branch you have your file 1 and file 2, and under feature 1 you will also get to see file 1 and file 2, but in addition you also have the feature 1 file. Now as a developer 2, I could also start to use this feature branch. Now I would need, but before I do that, I first would need to do a fetch. And then when I click on the plus icon here, I should be able to create a local branch for feature 1 and connect to it. So as you can see here, the moment when you say feature 1, you will get to see feature 1 file there. If I change it to master, it will change to the master out here, and the feature 1 file goes missing. So this way developers can switch to different branches and accordingly start the development and synchronize their changes. Now, in order to merge all the changes that I have made in this feature 1, I can go in as a developer 1 and select the project folder and switch the branch to master, and then click on the merge button here at the top. Now this gives me an option to merge from different branches. So I'm going to select origin feature 1 as the one that I'm going to merge to, and once this is done I would need to push my changes. So I'm going to push it all to master. So with this I have completed a process of creating a remote branch and then merging the remote branch with the master branch. So if I go into GitHub and look at the master, I should be able to see feature 1 file now within the master branch. I hope this gave you a good understanding as to how you would go about using GitHub with WebIDE. Thanks for watching.